Hello and welcome to Ticket Manager's All Access interview series, engaging leaders from across the sports marketing spectrum to identify and explore critical issues in the business of sports, entertainment, sponsorship, activation, ticketing, hospitality, and even more than that. I'm your host, Jim Andrews, and joining me on this episode is a longtime friend and great marketer, Tony Wells. Tony, welcome. I am really thrilled that you're joining us today.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to be here with you today and look forward to the conversation we're going to have.
Yeah, wonderful. Just as background for our listeners and viewers, you've had marketing and you've headed up marketing and media for many top brands and companies, C-suite level roles at Verizon most recently. Before that, USAA, Schneider Electric, ADT, 24 Hour Fitness. And throughout all those positions, and then during your earlier career, the time spent at Visa and Nissan and others, you've got some deep experience in sports marketing and partnerships, as well as overall marketing. So I want to certainly talk about some of those sponsorships and partnerships and your expertise there. But first, really wanted to talk about something that I know is important to you, and that's the idea of creating and executing partnerships through a DEI lens. For a long time, I think partnerships and DEI efforts ran on parallel tracks, but they really didn't intersect. And you would argue, I think, that needs to change, and I would agree with that. So I'd love to talk to you and get your thoughts on how does that change happen? What are the steps that people in sponsorship and similar positions need to take to really integrate partnerships and DEI?
You're right, Jim. I'm very passionate about this topic. I know in today's world, it's also very polarizing. But, it's funny as I look at this, I really subscribe to the thought that a rising tide lifts all boats. And that when you look at the demographics, where they're headed in the US, and even all the studies that have been done around how a more inclusive approach to business drives outcomes, I continue to be surprised that there's such concern and people that are against it. But that aside, I think the role of a marketer is to kind of skate where the puck is going to ensure a brand stays relevant. And in my mind, when you don't take on your sponsorship portfolio and your sponsorship property through a DEI lens, you kind of risk losing a lot of your audience. And you really need to look at that from a messaging standpoint, a creative standpoint, a media perspective, and ensure that the communication for whatever property you have takes those into consideration. I also believe that when you look internal to what's happening inside your company, are you looking at it from a supply chain perspective? Who's in front of the camera? Who's behind the camera? Also, in terms of talent, are you making the conversation and all the planning that you have about activating your property? Is there a diverse set of folks at the table? Because when you don't have that, you risk your communication could be off target. And when you spend this type of money, you just want to make sure you get the full exposure and the full benefit and ROI that happens. And I just don't know any property where some of the viewers, the spectators, and the audience for a property, they all have a different take. You take something like the NFL, what a Hispanic consumer may resonate with them may be very different than a woman or an African American. And so you just, I think, have to think about that as you activate.
It's so true, and the point is that it's not just one aspect, right? It's not just making sure you're activating against different targets, but as you say, it can be an HR issue. Do we have diverse set of voices in the room when we're making decisions? You mentioned the supply channel. I was talking with one property recently, and they realized, to their credit, that they did not have a lot of minority-owned businesses as suppliers. And they said, we're out there talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and making that one of our pillars. And it's in some ways easy to talk about that and develop digital content. But are we again going back to walking the walk there? When we look at our own supply chain, it's not as diverse, nearly as diverse as it should be. So it really, you're right. It really covers all of those.
Yeah, And I'll say, Jim, you look at the recent Women's World Cup, the Spain won, but the winning of the World Cup was just derailed by the fact that there was not a DEI perspective or how a woman was mistreated, in a moment that should have been a crowning, years of sweat and toil to be and operate and play at that level. And the country and the governing body and the team and the players, they were all taken off track by a really unfortunate event. So I just think it's important that we continue to have a DEI lens as we think about how we activate properties and bring them to life.
So, talking about partnerships and sponsorships, as I mentioned, something that's been near and dear to your heart throughout your career. And I think for a lot of folks, we have a lot of listeners who are in the early stages of their careers and would look at a path that you took and say, boy, that's something that I would aspire to. And I'm wondering, as you kind of grew into the CMO roles that we talked about, were there certain moments where you said, looking back at your earlier part of your career, boy, I wish I knew that when I was first starting out, because it would have maybe helped me either make better deals or make better decisions or anything like that?
Yeah, look, I'll focus on the sponsorship area, which is near and dear to my heart. I think there's probably three things. One, integrated marketing is 100 times more difficult than we talk about and often experience and are prepared to execute against. It's just very hard to bring a whole organization together. And I'll keep using the NFL maybe because they're the kind of maybe in the US the premier partner right now in terms of visibility and performance. But you look at a brand that spins on the NFL, like the way that you activate it, whether you bring the sales organization around, the HR for employee benefit, frontline folks, taking it all the way to retail, having it show up in media and social. Like there are all these thousands of touch points. And I often feel that brands are not spending enough time to bring it to life and to really, really integrate it around a core message that, crosses all these channels. And you spend all this money on rights fees and you don't really bring it to bear, which is kind of so one integrated marketing is much tougher. And so learning to be a good integrated marketer and seeking to contribute in a way that brings your functional expertise to the table, I think is super important. I think too, the 3-to-1 ratio, because I often look at properties and they're spending on the rights fees, but they don't have the sufficient dollars to amplify the message. And then I just think it's so important finally that I wish I knew that you really have to level set all of your internal stakeholders around what the property is, the insights, consumer insights, because often I've found that everyone may not be a football fan. Everybody may not know how to tap into fan avidity, and they're doing creative or they're doing PR and they may not be a football fan. And so level setting everyone to appreciate the sport, the consumers, the viewers, the spectators, the participants is, I think, super important.
Those are three really interesting aspects. I want to go back to that first one for a second because I'm really interested, and maybe there's a bit of naivete on my part, having never sat in a CMO role at a major corporation like you have, and I certainly understand that integrated marketing, when you look at all of the many pieces, especially in a national or a global company, just logistically, that does seem to be an almost insurmountable challenge. But is it more than just the kind of the sheer scale of that? And I guess what I'm asking is, again, I would think that if at the top of the organization, you could kind of mandate, hey, this is what we're doing, this is why we need to do it, and kind of have that filter down throughout an organization. But again, that's probably naive on my part that it's just not that easy, even if it is coming from on high, if you will.
Yeah, look, I don't think it's that easy. And I always think that everyone's not aligned. There are people who don't believe in sponsorship. There's a business leader who goes, I got more important priorities right now. And you leave opportunity on the table, and so to me, the big thing is to get that alignment across key stakeholders and leave yourself sufficient time to do the work. Often what happens is, you have a short fuse and you're moving quick and there's so many demands on the business that you don't have the time to do the work, and to ensure everybody is working off the same insight. But it is extremely difficult, and I think often marketers kind of walk by it because a truly integrated marketing takes time, takes a commitment, and takes an understanding that, if you want to go fast, that old saying, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think sometimes the together is lost in corporate America at times.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And yeah, that need for meeting quarterly earning statements and all of that kind of stuff sometimes is really, a challenge for sponsorships and partnerships as well as a lot of other things. You had a longer than average tenure in your marketing leadership roles, but typically, there's a lot of turnover in those positions, and that has an impact on those working for them, and including the folks in the partnership and sponsorship positions. Any advice for the kind of practitioners, the professionals in sponsorship when it comes to navigating those times when there is change at the top of the organization?
It is really important to build a body of work with documented measurement, ROI, and results so that when you end the season or this year's activation, you can merchandise that throughout the organization so that key stakeholders see the results. Sometimes marketers aren't good at marketing, like internal,
Yeah.
and folks have to know, okay, we spent X, here's the results we've got, here are the things we did well, here are the things we need to improve upon. And when a new marketing leader comes into the organization, I think it's very important to get to them early to show them, here's how we are activating and bringing this to life. Mainly because for the CMOs now, there's just a tremendous amount of pressure to demonstrate results quickly. Like, you are on the shot clock. And I think that's one of the challenges with the CMO role right now is that, first of all, everybody thinks they know marketing, and their opinion of marketing often is a lot of opinions versus data. And so when I was at USA, we used to say, and the CMO, Wes Laird, used to say, hey, marketing knows marketing and we bring data to the table, not opinions. And so I think there's this idea of letting the data lead, because sponsorship it's meant to evoke emotion. And I think a lot of people feel strongly about one way or another about whether this is the right property or not for a brand. So that data led. And then I think, again, making sure you have that alignment across all of the organizations so that sales, ops, technology, HR, everybody has an opportunity to participate and use something like the NFL to help, achieve their business objectives. Because that's the power of a property, is that it can really drive business outcomes. But again, you've got to put the resources against it and have that alignment. So yeah, that's, to me, if a new CMO was coming in, I would get to them quickly with the results and data and show the alignment and the results so that it's quickly evident to them.
Looking now and maybe doing a little bit of crystal ball gazing, if you will, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges to the success of brand partnerships these days? And maybe it's some of the stuff we've already touched on. I mean, obviously, they're the internal challenges, but anything else come to mind when you think about that question?
Anytime you have sponsorship, you've got to find a way to amplify and scale the message. And so I think a key thing is just what's happening in the media space in terms of streaming, in terms of fragmentation, in terms of duplication of audience, and specifically all that ties back to the cost and the execution difficulty. Like, when I started out in this business, I mean, there were only four networks. Like, you could get to anybody with mainly those four networks, or you get, the vast majority of the country. Now you have, again, I'll pick on the NFL, streaming partners, and now that, Black Friday game, and now Thursday with Amazon, and like there's all these different ways that the sport can be consumed, and if you are a brand, how you're going to carry that message. So I really think the cost and fragmentation of media is going to continue to be a concern, and then that often leads to escalation of the total activation cost and the escalation of rights fees. So I don't know how high we can keep going. And the more fragmentation and the more that categories get further bifurcated and we start slicing and dicing, domestic versus import and, you know, wireless versus broadband versus, internet, like you start splicing categories. And the question then becomes like, who's really getting the benefit? So as a brand guy, that's my main concern is like, can I activate this? Can I get a point of difference versus others? And how do I continue to make the economics work?
It's a balance, right? Because you've got you understand the rights holders need to monetize all of these different opportunities, but yeah, where do we strike that sweet spot where both sides feel that they're getting value out of it? I guess that's always been an issue in the sponsorship and partnership space, and that kind of leads me to another question, and where can either the rights holders or the brands, do you think, do a better job as partners in kind of understanding the needs of the other party, and again figuring out ways where each one can get optimal value out of these deals?
Real hot button for me, Jim. Look, I'm pretty hard on properties. I feel like over time the sophistication, the understanding of brand needs has probably not grown comparable to the rights fee escalation. Like, the value that I see from the sales team at many properties is not evident. I think often from proposals showing up with some other company's name in it to fully not understanding, the category that I'm in, and also not having a true justification for how they price the proposal. And so, look, if you're selling a house, there's comps and, there's cost per square foot and, what was the house originally sold for? There's ways to gauge the value, but I'm finding more and more that it's kind of more of a what the market will bear or what the property owner thinks the market will bear. And look, there is something to that, but I also think that as a property owner, you kind of have to have a little justification of like, how did you arrive at this number? You know, look, I'm always going to want it for the lowest price, but at the same time, like you have to have some justification. And I often find that once you start double clicking there, there's a lack of understanding or knowledge of the category, what my market share is, how many wireless consumers they are in this marketplace, how many of them do I own, what's the appeal or the index for wireless customers for this specific team or franchise. And so that level of sophistication for the sales team, I just think it needs to be there. And I was talking to a property recently or someone that works for a property, and they're like, well, we take our categories, something like telecommunications, and we spread around who calls on what brands. And look, if I was ever, and I've been in a sales role twice, so I have just a small little couple years experience with this. I would build category experts and let them run the whole category, because I think it would allow a salesperson to dig deep, understand the components, read the trade publications from that industry or category to kind of understand what's happening, because sometimes properties leave money on the table because they don't understand the category, and a brand goes and grabs a lot more than maybe they should, and then sometimes they clearly don't understand because of how they are slicing and dicing a category. So that's the main thing, is just do a good job selling, do a good job building value, and convince me that you understand my category and what are the drivers of it, and that you spent some time researching, my company and what my needs might be.
You unlocked a couple of things there. for me in terms of that idea. First of all, the specialization. I've always considered that to be a best practice that I assume most properties were following, maybe not. And I go back again, not to tell old war stories, but Rob Prasmark, who's the first salesperson for the top sponsorship. When he secured Bausch and Lomb, the contact lens maker, I think that was top one, maybe top two. He would talk about how he went to optometrist conventions to learn the business that a contact lens maker like Bausch and Lomb was in, so he could understand that and then craft a proposal that he took to their senior leadership and got
Yeah.
significant sponsorship. And that always struck me as like, well, sure, that's the way you need to do that, especially if we're talking about a multi-million dollar partnership. But the other thing that people who watch this podcast, listen to it, have heard me express this kind of frustration before is I feel like, and again, you and I've known each other probably 25 years at this point. I feel like we could have had that conversation. You could have mentioned some of those things that you just said about properties not really understanding the business and making those kinds of really mistakes when they approach a prospective partner. Do you have an idea of why that hasn't changed that much
Well,
in
that's
over two
that's what I was
decades?
saying earlier. The rights fee keeps going up, but
Yeah.
the level of sophistication of sales and category. And look, I don't know. I think certainly there's probably pressure. And look, I'm sure I'll get a call from some property person that I know saying, "Hey, you don't understand what's going on here." Look, there's probably fragmentation in terms of the number of categories and brands that they're dealing with. I suppose that they're probably doing it with less headcount, just like everybody's operating on less headcount. Look, I'm sure there's market conditions, but I do think that there's something very, very telling when the salesperson knows my category or brand category and can really articulate it and knows how Verizon's being positioned versus T-Mo versus AT&T versus some of the virtual network providers out there, and they don't sometimes they don't understand that they can't do the best job representing their it's like it's know your customers essentially what it is. And so I don't know, I just think there's a huge opportunity there for brands. And like I said, the property person that I talked to, they're like, no, we take the categories and we spread it because that way we sell against each other, internal competition. And I'm like, okay, now automotive, like, okay, there's OEMs, there's dealer groups, there's individual dealers, there's mega dealer groups. Like these categories are very, very complicated, to be honest, to really extract value. And if 10 guys on your team or 10 gals on your team have to understand the automotive category, like I just don't know how you can't be an expert at every category. So I guess maybe I'm advocating to properties that they have specialists, especially in the big core financial services, telecommunications, automotive, the big categories that drive the revenue. I really think having a category expert can be really, really advantageous.
As you said, you and I both know really smart, really great folks on the sales side of this business, and I don't think it's not a matter of individual will about wanting to do things the right way. I think sometimes it's organizational and structural, as you said. Kind of there are certain pressures or certain timelines that I think probably makes it hard to do some of the things that from an outside perspective it seems like would be natural. So we get that, and I don't want to think anybody out there think we're picking on folks in sales.
Well, I am picking, but
Yeah.
my cleats are hung up now. I'm off the field to play a little bit. So, but I am picking. I am like we have to do a better job on this. It's in everyone's best interest to try to just improve on this one area. I think so.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is you're going to end up with better deals that are going to turn into longer term deals and deliver more value for both people. So Well, Tony, it's always great to talk to you about this kind of stuff. You know so much about this business. I always learn something from talking to you. So again, appreciate the time today. I know that this will be valuable for all the listeners out there. So hopefully we will continue to cross paths. Hopefully those even though those cleats may be hung up, I'm sure you'll still be around in some way, shape, or form. I hope.
It's great to connect, and you're right. We go back 25 plus years, and I would say that your involvement with IEG and the consulting practice and everything you guys used to run back at that time was very instrumental in me falling in love with this practice and functional expertise with sponsorship. So I want to thank you, Jim, and for all the folks that are in the business out there. Like, this is just an amazing industry and so many exciting things. And I continue to observe just how people are taking it to the next level and making sponsorships work hard for brands and deliver for consumers. So thanks again, Jim.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Appreciate you, and we will leave it there and pick up the conversation somewhere down the road. So, Tony, thank you, and on behalf of everyone at Ticket Manager, thank all of you for watching and listening. And please join us again for the next episode in the All Access interview series.